And we are live. Hey guys, it's the Deadly Analysis Podcast. I'm your host, Antonio, this week, filling in for Noah, who is out of the country having a lovely time. And he'll be back, I believe, next week. And this week we're going to be discussing Alien, which is one of my favorite horror movies. I think one of the best horror movies of all time. And a film that's really great because it has a lot of currency. You know, a lot of folks have seen it. And it also is one of those movies that you can take apart almost endlessly. You can sort of stick a proboscis down into this movie and infest it with all kinds of different themes and ethics and politics, and we're going to get to all of that tonight. So maybe a little bit different of a format, slightly, maybe a little bit more of a formal format than the one that Noah usually employs. But I think it's justified in this case because we are covering a movie that just has so much content. There's so much to dig through. Just almost any one of the bullet points in the outline that's in front of me, we could literally teach an entire college lecture, a 2-hour lecture on. So without further ado, let's get into it. We have Shayra and Jim with us tonight as our co-hosts, and they'll be helping us dissect this little facehugger of a movie. So let's just throw it to Shayra and Jim first. Guys, give me your. I don't exactly want to have your review of the movie because I want that to be kind of at the end. But tell me how this movie viscerally impacted you when you watched it. Give me like the 60-second overview of when you finish the movie. You stand up and you say to yourself, or you feel to yourself, how did this movie make you react? Let's go Jim first.
Okay. I was waiting to see if Shayra wanted to jump up on that one. I saw this movie originally when I was very, very young. I think this was one of my first or in the first 10 R-rated films that I ever saw. And I think at that time I really didn't get it was about trying to survive the film. It was about trying to prove that I was grown up enough to watch a movie like this. And now I rewatched it again today, and I got up from the film, and I think part of me really wished I could see it for the first time now as an adult. I think that there were several scenes in this film which I remembered viscerally and vividly from when I saw it as a young child, and now I wish that I could re-experience some of those and be surprised by them. I think what I felt and thought after I saw this was how they just don't make movies like this anymore. How this has sort of shaped the conversation for the past 38 years as it relates to horror movies, 39 years almost. This is so imitated, and it's imitated for very good reason. It's a fantastic film. So I think that the first thing I thought when I saw it today was, damn, I wish now was the first time I had seen it. But yeah. I also probably should say that I remember it being scarier than it was. So when I saw it today, it wasn't quite as scary as it was in my own memory, which was slightly disappointing. But yeah, I'll sort of throw it over.
When you say not as scary, did you still find it to be as gripping or dramatic, or did it lose some of its luster just overall?
A little bit of both. I still found it very gripping. I still found it very dramatic. I still liked it. I still wanted to. I was still moved along in the plot. In fact, I remember getting up and going to the bathroom and pausing it and going, "Oh wow, an hour and 15 minutes have gone by," and it seemed as though that hour and 15 minutes had just chugged right along. It didn't feel like that long at all. So this was but I think that I saw some of the editing tricks that this film does. Some of the like, it seems that in modern films we get to see the full alien. Of course, that there's that money shot from Alien Covenant where it's on top of the ship, and you get to see the full alien in all of her glory. But this, in this case, it seemed like they were hiding parts of the alien, but due to creature effects, due to the limitations of the time. You know, it's not a knock against the film, but comparing it to modern day special effects, you could tell that there's some age on this film. So that's where I was coming from there. Shayra, do you want to?
I just want to respond about the age part. That is part of the thing that really makes me enjoy not only this film, but also Blade Runner and even the new Blade Runner that came out. They have this very nostalgic kind of texturing of technology, you know, like it's so interesting. It's its own world. And the way that I usually look at it when I watch it is to look at it as if it is a completely different, you know, world or timeline of our, you know, human being. And you could actually combine Blade Runner and Alien. They could be in the same exact world, honestly. And Ridley Scott has been asked about it, and he's like, yeah, they could be in the same world. You got the AI, and you know, maybe it's just a different time periods in that weird technology, which is why I have my problems with Prometheus, obviously. But no, with this film, the feeling I got from it originally, just some little tidbits about me. I have claustrophobia really bad. If I get in a small room, I freak out. If someone like tries to cover me or keep me from being able to move, I have panic attacks. I get really, really uncomfortable with that. But I also have a huge problem with like dirty, grimy, sweaty kind of feelings. Like whenever when I lived in Texas, I needed to shower like a million times a day because it was so, I could not be sweaty or gross or grimy. So basically this movie is like a panic attack waiting to happen with me. Like it is so claustrophobic, so grimy and sweaty and dirty. And you wouldn't even need the alien to be there for this film to make me uncomfortable. And honestly, that may be the main thing that makes it so great. Like the monster isn't even necessary to create that suspense and that discomfort and that, ooh, what's gonna happen? Ooh, what's happening? Ew, ew. It's uncomfortable right off the bat. And I also have played Alien Isolation, which is supposed to be the follow-up. It's supposed to be between Alien and Aliens. And playing that game also makes me quite uncomfortable, but not as uncomfortable as Alien because there's all these small corridors and little closets that she's in, and it's not okay. It causes me a huge amount of discomfort, but I love it. Like I love feeling the emotions in the safety of my own home. But that's actually one of the reasons why I see movies like Alien and other movies differently. You know, when in Neverending Story, when Bastian goes into the bookstore and he says, "Oh, I've read all these books," and he wanted to try reading the Neverending Story, and he's like, "You don't want to read that one. This one's not safe. Your other books are safe. This one's not safe." I like it when a film makes me feel a little bit like I'm unsafe, like something bad could happen to me, and Alien brings that out of me even before, you know, facehuggers happen. So it's got a great feel to it. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, all of the entire ship is a piece of shit. Like that's one of the interesting things about this film, and contrasting with modern day sci-fi. It seems like modern day sci-fi is trying to prove to us that in the future technology is going to be awesome. And one of the interesting things about Alien is that ship it breaks down. It's disgusting. It's dirty.
Steam shooting out.
Steam shooting everywhere because reasons. I mean, that ship is a piece of shit. And I think that's a really interesting touch, and it makes the film and the characters so relatable. One of the geniuses of the screenplay is that, you know, you've got to be able to transfer a 1979 audience with fairly limited experiences with real high concept sci-fi to a distant future. And one of the ways they do that is it turns all of the characters into basically truck drivers. So yeah, we can't identify with astronauts, but we can identify with a truck driver who just wants his share, and is afraid that the company is going to cheat him out of his salary. I think that's one of the brilliant things about the way this film is constructed. And I think you're right. It works on me too in a way that gets me into this feeling of dirty, grimy, shitty places and whatnot.
It's interesting that you talk about the kind of the populism of the film's design, because I kind of, as someone who has read a lot of sci-fi from a lot of different eras, it seems to me that there's been kind of a trend of oscillating between two extremes in that aesthetic regard. So, for example, with Star Trek, everything is very clean and shiny, particularly by like the 1960s standards. Everything looks very polished. Everything works fine. People are getting along. We're all communists now, or whatever, socialists. And the general aesthetic is that the future is polished. The future is going to be more chrome than the past. The future is going to be cleaner than the past. The future is going to be, sharper dressed than the past, ideally. And you see a reaction against this aesthetically by the mid-70s in the form of Star Wars, which is deliberately designed for all of the technology to look used. That was one of the purposes. And I think that's also where you start to see the populism of character that you guys were talking about earlier. Because, for example, in Star Trek, almost everyone in the main crew is a professional of some kind. Mr. Spock is obviously like a multiple PhD across various sciences. So is Scotty. Kirk is a captain. He's got a position of high authority. He's a career military officer. But by the time we get along to Star Wars, for example, we've got, a farm boy and like this like kind of podunk smuggler who probably would, had a pickup truck in the Earth version of the story. You know what I mean? And like, put Obi-Wan and Luke under a tarp and like drove across the border or whatever, and so Alien, coming only a few years after it, is very much in this kind of grittier design aesthetic, which you also see echoed in Blade Runner. You see it echoed in Terminator. You see it echoed throughout the late 80s and early 90s. And then you gradually see an inversion back to the sort of hyper chrome look, which is now dominating sci-fi that's coming out these days. And so I guess on that note, it's appropriate to pivot to the imagery of this film, which is, I think, as far as peeling away the layers of this film like an onion, I think the biggest layer, the thickest layer, the most interesting, the tastiest layer is the skin of it, is the imagery of the film. I think the imagery of the film is what holds this all together. I asked you guys, what was your emotional reaction when you watched this movie? My emotional reaction whenever I watch this movie is kind of a feeling of awe. And that may be overstating it a little bit, but my reaction to this movie on an emotional level is that this movie does its symbolism, its imagery, almost pitch perfectly. Like its design is almost ideal. It's almost impossible to imagine how they could have improved on the design elements of the movie. The xenomorph in particular is a work of genius by H.R. Giger, in that it's basically a Jungian archetype given flesh. It's something dark from a nightmare come to life. It has a nondescriptness that makes it terrifying at the same time as it is a very specific, identifiable, iconic entity. And so let's get into the imagery of this film, which I think is the strongest element, and the element that really drives not only the narrative but also a lot of the philosophical elements of the film. So this is just some of the stuff that I wrote down. I'll just go over some of this very quickly. So, for example, there's an element of light and darkness. The crew uniforms are all white or light colored. most of the ship's living areas are toned light colored. Most of the more dangerous areas of the ship are toned in a darker color, and we're similarly kind of queued up because everything related to the xenomorph has like a black oily, sort of thing that just naturally. The thing about this film's imagery is that it naturally primes your instincts in exactly the way that the filmmaker Ridley Scott wants you to go. So in the same way, there's a juxtaposition between industrial and organic. The ship, the good guys, are defined by metal, things that are stamped, stead, angular. The Nostromo is very geometric construction, as opposed to the navigator's ship and the xenomorph, which have contours which evoke living matter rather than industrial craftsmanship.
So I have a theory on
Yes.
so the white, how they're wearing white and everything. When they are woken up and they're in this big white room, I see it as their babies being born, and they are in the womb of mom because they call the ship mother, and this is all a child going out in the world story, and this is a very common storyline with all horror, is young people growing up and realizing how bitter and disgusting and horrible everything is, and that's what this is in a more exaggerated way. But even the typical slasher film goes down this whole line. This is why when you have sex, you get stabbed to death. You're coming of age. It's a coming of age tale. Like when you start to grow up, you get to realize how shitty everything is, and get to be sad and in the darkness and in the grossness, and maybe that's why it's a lot more wet everywhere when you go where the alien ships are and everything. It's gross and dark and ill. So yeah, I feel like they were just babies being born, and then they leave the mother's womb and realize how dark and horrible reality is. So
It's almost go ahead, Jim.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on that a little bit. Like there were when you were talking about the design of the ship and the lighting and the color palette that Scott uses, I noticed that there were 3 areas that were lit, that were white, and that was the medical bay, the airlock, and the dinner, the diner scene. And in 2 of those areas, I think it really fits with the type of thing that Shayra was talking about, and in the diner, I think it fits a lot with what you were talking about, because that's a place that we are supposed to feel like everything's going to be okay. We're supposed to, like, it's priming us to be relaxed. And then, of course, the most iconic scene from this film takes place in that well-lit area. And I think there's a lot of ways in which Scott's playing with our expectations in this film. Something similar to what you were talking about. He primes us to be okay in the dinner scene, and then of course the xenomorph jumps out of John Hurt's chest. There's another very interesting thing that he does as well. Sigourney Weaver, right now, to us, she's a star. She's an iconic, amazing actress. But this was, I think, her 3rd film, her first film where she's second billing. Tom Skerritt was first billing. So when he dies midway through the film, we don't know who the fuck our protagonist is. People going to that film in 1979 don't realize that Sigourney Weaver is a star. They think Tom Skerritt is the star. They think he's going to be the final girl, so to speak. And by killing him off halfway through the film, it's basically signaling to us, no, everybody is at risk here. And you don't know who your hero is until, of course, Ripley rises and does all the things she does. So
I have a theory of that too.
Shayra's theories.
My theories.
Real quick though, I was going to say that's an even better observation in light of the fact that Tom Skerritt's character dies off screen. Like they really hit the unexpected note there. You are expecting him to make it through the film, And then not only does he die, you don't even get to see him. He just disappears until, like, 5 seconds near the end of the movie to give you some closure.
So yeah, the film is trying to throw you off balance at every moment. It is so trying to like kill all the tropes. And now it's obviously tropes in and of itself because everybody's copied a lot of the stuff. But the reason why we have Ripley or whatever, but she's okay. She is the person that is supposed to be the asshole who dies first. She is the one who's by the book. She is the one like, we're going to do things this way. She's the one with no heart and says to leave him out of the ship. She's the one who's the asshole. She's supposed to be the first person who dies. And you're supposed to have a little bit of relief. Like, oh, fuck that bitch anyway. That was the point of that character. And we took that character all the way to the end. She was the one that survived because in reality, when you do things by the book, when you do what you're supposed to do, because there's protocols for these things for a reason, that's how you stop from dying. And everybody wants, one of the big themes of The Walking Dead, which my daughter and I get so pissed off at watching The Walking Dead at this point, but it's this idea that if you have heart and empathy and love for everybody, that's what's going to survive. The sociopaths are all going to die, and all the good, nice, happy, loving people are going to live. No, motherfucker. That is not reality. Like, the sweetheart, loving people are going to die first. They are going to die first. You're going to be destroyed by the zombies. But I understand why they tell stories in that way. But this basically turned that on its head. It's like, no, the person who is able to say, hey, I may have these certain emotional feelings, and we know she's emotional when we see her with the cat, when we see her talking to Dallas, we know that there's, a heart in there. But she goes, you know what? I have to put this aside because this is the way we need to do things so we all don't die. And I don't know. That is the most interesting thing about her character, is she was supposed to be first to die. So.
Well, that raises an interesting point about the politics of the movie, or which is, what's the source of authority? How does this movie regard authority as proceeding? What's good and what's evil about this in this movie? And I would submit to you guys that the authoritarianism in this movie is kind of ambiguous. Like, Ripley is ultimately the good guy, and so Ripley's calls are good calls, despite there being hard calls. And so there's an element of the great man of history here, right? In that Ripley is the one who, despite everybody else kind of flying off the handle, she's the one who continually sees things with clarity, tries to act with responsibility to the greater good, and is capable of making the hard decisions that end up sinking other people. And indeed, her persistence in making particular calls in the face of opposition by the rest of the gang, her insistence on getting everyone on board with her idea rather than going along with the rest of the gang, is eventually what saves her life. Her persistence in continuing to hunt the alien after the captain is killed, her initial skepticism about letting John Hurt into the lock, or John Hurt through the airlock when he's all infested. She's the one who makes hard decisions that are necessary to make and that are ultimately beneficial for everybody, but are unpopular at the time, which is kind of there's an element of this which we might call authoritarian, in that she's obviously the one who's right in the face of the democratic collective that is opposing her, But on the other hand, the authoritarianism of the movie seems to be limited because the captain is an idiot. I mean, he makes a bunch of terrible decisions that are fairly obviously bad calls. And the corporation is completely evil, and that's the ultimate authority, the ultimate hierarchy, the entity that establishes the rules under which the society that we encounter is operating. So, because of that, I would say that the politics of the movie are not so much exactly authoritarian as they are kind of more in a Nietzschean sense, in a sense of will to power, where there's an immediacy. He who hesitates is lost. If you spend time dicking around wondering about the alien, or being in awe of it, or being scared of it, instead of deciding and acting against it, you're going to be screwed over. If you don't take an aggressive approach that is very, very firm-handed but also at the same time cold-blooded, then you're going to end up screwed over. If you trust the organization that provides you the rules and that is telling you what's going on, there is an anti-authoritarianism, a sort of subversive authoritarianism there. The person who sees clearly is the person who sees past the corporate BS, in addition to seeing past just the BS of the group dynamic. So I think there's kind of a Nietzschean undertone to the movie's politics, and I wonder what you two have to reflect on that.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that's like, it's definitely this Superman. There's an existentialist strain to the philosophy of this film, where it is almost person against beast, and the person, Ripley's the one with the intellect and the ability to reason, whereas the beast, the alien, is only driven by these primal urges. And I think that was played out in the Ian Holm head on a desk scene, where I think Lambert says, "You admire it," and Ian Holmes' character Ash says, "I admire its simplicity. I admire its purity. It's a perfect organism." And really, his definition in that case of a perfect organism, which is then of course echoed in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, which I think we're all going to try and forget. But his definition of a perfect organism is one that is incapable of reason. And Ripley is one who is both capable of reason, but also driven by the primal urge to survive. And so I think that goes along with your Nietzschean reading of the film.
Yes, and that's actually a really interesting point, the point about survival specifically, because you can argue that the thing that distinguishes the alien from the rest of us is precisely that its purity of essence is such that it has no will to survive. It is just id to destroy. It is destructive id, and that's the sum total of the being. It exists only to seek out other things and destroy them. There is no survival element of its life cycle. And indeed, if you look at it literally, there's no survival element of its life cycle. The Facehugger goes and impregnates somebody and then dies, and then the guy that it impregnates then dies and then produces the xenomorph. So, literally two things have to die in order for the one thing to live, minimum.
Do you see the Facehugger as a separate entity, though? Because I always saw the Facehugger as sort of like the caterpillar that becomes the butterfly. So yeah, I'm sort of curious about your reading there.
First we have to establish this. Are you guys a director's cut people, or are you guys a theatrical cut people? Because there's two different answers if you go with either or.
Can you explain the difference?
So there's a scene that's cut out of the original Alien that's in the director's cut that is fucking fantastic, but that would make no sense with the rest of the entire storyline, with the sequels and prequels and all the other shit. But the scene that was cut out was, she actually happens upon the rest of the people. She sees what happened to them when she goes up in a room and they're all turning into the eggs. The humans are turning into the eggs. And mind you, Giger's original artwork is used in this scene because they changed the eggs to a 4-part thing that spreads apart because it looked too much like a vagina. It was a vagina, but whatever. Like, you see a vulva type shape at the top of the egg. It's supposed to split open. And that original shape to the egg is up there, and they're forming into the vagina egg thing. And Dallas, while he's transforming into this thing, he's like, kill me. And she blowtorches all of the rest of the fucking crew. Like, she lights them all on fire with a fucking flamethrower, which is an awesome scene, but it goes against some of the other lore, because the eggs are actually us. The reason why there was a bunch of eggs down at the bottom that John Hurt's character goes to inspect is because those were previous beings that got turned into eggs and have the facehuggers waiting for them. So you birth the final form, but you also become what's needed for the impregnation part. So it's a weird cycle that they created. And I know that O'Bannon, he had studied a lot about parasites and other bugs. So he did a lot of his ideas about this off of bugs and also old sci-fi movies, of course. But it's an interesting idea that we would become the eggs that the facehuggers live in.
Yeah, to answer your question, Jim, I would regard the facehugger as basically like the spermatozoa in the life cycle. And so the alien that comes out, and I think that Ridley Scott actually explicitly backs this view up at some point, because one of the points about the alien is precisely that the alien has humanoid features. They wanted the alien to actually have like fingers and legs and knees that articulated similarly to humans and so on. And the purpose of doing so was to illustrate that the alien is a mixture of the facehugger's DNA with the DNA of the host body, so that it takes on some features, it conserves some features of the original organism. And while we can get into all kinds of nerdy debates about alien lore, the successive alien movies do preserve this feature of the alien life cycle, where whatever the alien infested, it takes on particular features of the thing that it infested when it births. I think this is seen most significantly in the Pred alien, and also in the alien that comes out of a dog. I think that was was that in Aliens? I think that was in Aliens.
Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And I had not heard about the director's cut version, which flies in the face of the whole queen alien that happens in the later sequels. It seems, I guess we should take one moment to just sort of mourn the fact that this whole alien lore nerdy conversation, as it is, has gotten, like a lot of franchises, it's gotten away from itself in ways that are rather disappointing. Aliens was a great sort of action film. Alien 3 has its problems, as with all the other sequels, but it seems like they're changing a lot of the things that we liked about the first one, where it was this enclosed Die Hard. It was like Die Hard in space with an alien. And yeah, I guess.
So one of the things I'd like to point out, so have you guys heard of Dark Star? It is a comedy film. It was a student film that O'Bannon, the writer of Alien, was a part of. And who's the guy who did Aliens? God damn it, I can't think right now.
James Cameron.
James Cameron. Yes, James Cameron, that's it. So they did a student film called Dark Star, and it was a comedy film out in space. It was done before Star Wars. And O'Bannon just later on, before Star Wars ever came out, because this was written before Star Wars, he was like, I would like to make this comedy movie we made, which is, by the way, a cult classic now, and if you want to check it out, it's pretty bad and funny. But he wanted to make it into a more serious sci-fi film. So he started writing a more serious version, but of course it was B-movie. If you read the original script, very B-movie, very shitty, I guess is the best word. It was good, but it was, those typical shitty horror movies, right? And when he started working with one of his friends, they upped it up a little bit, made it a little bit more interesting. Then they presented it to 21st Century Fox, and it just kind of sat on their desk. But when Star Wars came out, they were like, all right, we're going to do space. We're going to do space. We're going to do space. What do we have that has space? The only movie that had space was Alien. So Alien became a movie. And the corporate people came in. There was a bunch of writers in corporate that came in and pretty much gutted this script and changed it a lot. One of the original aspects of the original gender to any of the characters at all. He did not specify male or female with any of the characters. The corporate people came in and they were like, we need more interesting characters. These are too robotic of characters. And they also were the ones that created the AI. They added a lot of elements to the film that made it pretty good, but also it's not the same film anymore. So I think because there was so many chefs in the kitchen, you talk to any of them and they're going to tell you, oh, this goes in line with what the story is supposed to be. Oh, this goes in line with what the story is going to be. And if you watch any of the extras or the documentaries on this film, every single person they interview has a different idea of what this story is supposed to do. So the fact that it veers off in what direction, it's not even surprising because there's just too many chefs in the kitchen. Now there's putting everything into the pot and it tastes like shit. So
well, while that's true, I think there are a couple elements in Alien that particularly get betrayed by all successive movies and sort of set Alien apart as a unique item that gets retconned by everything that comes after it in a significant sense. And that is there's the two elements that define the alien as a villain. Right. In other words, thematically, we might say that the alien is a rapist. I mean, that's the obvious analogy. But in terms of actual features, rather than what he represents, there's two main qualities that the alien has, and the first is implacability. The alien is completely unstoppable. He's defined by his unstoppability. The whole point of the alien is that there is nothing that can survive an encounter with the alien. There is no resistance that you can ultimately offer. You can only delay the end for a time. It's ultimately going to get you as long as there is a possibility of it being able to reach you. So and we see this queued up early in the movie when they come on the navigator and you see this huge armored fossilized being that's been there for millions of years and is so much more technologically advanced than we are, and it just is ripped through. Like, I think they even say in the movie it looks like it went through it like it was made of tissue paper, yes, fire does deter the xenomorph, but it doesn't injure the creature. And in fact, when Dallas is by himself relying on the flamethrower and the xenomorph comes for him, it gets him. He's not even able to put up even a token resistance. When Ridley spaces the xenomorph, it's out in hard vacuum and it still keeps moving. It still grabs onto the spacecraft and hauls itself up for one final go at Ripley. And the one of the interesting symbolic features of the movie is that nobody actually survives untouched, in that, the Ripley doesn't actually ever touch the alien or else she would have died, but the Facehugger falls on her earlier in the movie, which is a symbolic demonstration that, if Facehugger were alive, she would have been the next victim. She would have been dead. And the only reason that she didn't die was simply that she didn't come up with the opponent at the moment when the opponent was actually capable of doing anything. And so that's the first aspect that is completely shot out by all successive Alien movies. Is this alien? It's not even clear that the alien is killed by the blast from the shuttle at the end. You just see it get blown off the shuttle and it flies off. It's not necessarily clearly indicated that the alien is dead. So it could still be alive. It could still just be floating around eternally in hard vacuum, waiting for somebody to pop around. And so it's totally implacable, and that's completely every successive Alien movie figures out some way to kill the alien or make the alien have a weakness in some substantial way, and that goes completely against the core theme of this movie, which is there is only surviving the rape. There is not defeating it. You can't get past it. You are only going to get it away from you permanently. That's the best you can manage. The second element that is key to this movie, that is completely betrayed by all future Alien movies, is that there's an element of mystery. You don't know anything about the xenomorph other than that the corporation knows about it and that it's a predator. Like, we can infer a couple things about its life cycle, but we don't know for sure if it can see. We don't know if it can smell. We don't know what senses it even has. We don't know how intelligent it is or not. We don't know if it's capable of language. We don't know if it's a single individual that, has infested this whole ship, or whether there's like a whole species just crawling around the universe out there. We don't know if it's a bioweapon. We have no clues as to its origins. We have no clues as to how old it is, what kind of life form it is. It's defined by its mystery. The only elements that are introduced to make us more aware of it are designed to just inspire us with, again, its implacability and its unknowability. Like, for example, when they discover that the Facehugger bleeds acid, that's designed to terrify us, that there's nothing you can do to stop this creature. This creature there is going to get what it wants to do done, and there's nothing you can do except maybe survive it. And again,
you can thank the executives for that one too, because that was a plot hole in O'Bannon's original script, and they were like, we have to create some reason why they can't take it off. Like, anybody would try to take it off. You can't just leave it there. And so they came up with the acid inside of it to show that they had to keep it on. So that was a plot hole that they fixed. And it's really fucking frightening.
Which is a genius way to fix a plot hole. I mean, there are no... sometimes I do like exercises where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna make an alien, like a writer's exercise, and I can't come up with a better one than the xenomorph, and for all of the reasons that you are articulating, Antonio, and the acid for blood is it for me. I wonder how many options they went through before they arrived at the blood is acid. Like, that's I'm sort of in awe of the writing of the creation of this creature from a writing standpoint, and I think but to go back to some of the points you were talking about, Antonio, and since we spent a lot of time in our review of The Thing discussing just this question, would you consider this a Lovecraftian villain, Antonio, or a Lovecraftian story?
That's a good question. I think the answer is no, and it's simply because while the opponent is immutable and while it has an air of mystery about it, it's not ultimately uninteractive. In other words, at the end of the day, you don't only have the choice of facing the madness that is your reality. At the end of the day, you can actually beat it and live to fight another day. You may not have killed it. It may still be around. It may be coming back for you, but you can, push it off and it'll live to live to fight another day. And you can also, to some extent, understand it. You can understand how it reproduces. You can understand what sort of threats it represents. It likes to move through air shafts. It's vulnerable to fire to some extent, etc. So while it has Lovecraftian elements in the sense of being a true other that is impenetrable, and that's the whole source of its menace, is precisely that it is such an other, that is such an inversion of what we regard as a normal, benign entity. I don't think it comes close to being Lovecraftian, but ultimately the fact that Ripley prevails against it in the particular way that she does, I think makes the story ultimately not a Lovecraftian one. Although I'm open to arguments to the contrary.
I mean, it obviously borrowed some elements from Lovecraft. I mean, when you have these like tentacle things coming down and pulling them up, and you don't know what happens to them. At least in the theatrical version, you don't see what happens to them. They just kind of go away. You don't know what happens. There's elements, but it's clearly not. I mean, it's clearly a slasher film. It might as well be Jason or Freddy, or it's a slasher film just with it's slasher film in space. You have a bunch of people and they get killed off by this monster, which is technically also a human in some ways, because it's John Hurt's baby, I guess. I don't know what you call it, but yeah, I don't know. It's got elements. Obviously, Lovecraft is very much loved, and people like to throw in little shout outs, but I don't know if it is Lovecraftian.
Here's another element in which I would say it's not Lovecraftian, and that is that in Lovecraft, things don't happen to you because you deserve them exactly. Things happen to you just because the nature of the universe is horror, and it's going to come and get you eventually. One of the elements in which this is a very conventional horror film is that it definitely follows aspects of the so-called morality play when it comes to sketching its broad ethics out. In other words, in terms of who dies, the people who die are generally people who so-called deserve to more than the people who survive, ultimately Ripley. So Ripley survives at the end, not necessarily through arbitrary whim, as might happen in a Lovecraftian story, but rather because she's the toughest, smartest cookie who has the clearest head and makes the best calls. And that's definitely a sharply distinguishing feature. And the aspect in which this is conventional is, there's a way that you can cast this movie where the humans are the invaders, right? That we it's sort of like a Frankensteinian cautionary tale. We overreached, we went into the forbidden knowledge, and we sought it out, and we opened it up, and there was a facehugger in there. Oh no, So so there's an element almost of a critique of imperialism. There's this capitalistic mining company that's like all corporate and stuff, and because of the profit in it and the weapons division, probably they want to go and retrieve this thing, and it turns out to be a horrible mistake that's super costly in lives. And the people who end up dying are the first guy who dies is the guy who's dumb enough to like poke the alien egg and look right at it, and the next person to die is the person who wanders off and is looking at the cat. And the next person to die after that is the guy who's like alone in the corridor, etc. So there's an element where the people who get picked off are kind of the people that we conventionally are cued to expect would be picked off in a horror movie. And so as far as the ethics go of this movie, first of all, what do you guys think about the element of imperialism? To what extent is the alien a just punishment? The native that we arrive and find is actually better equipped to handle our imperialism. What do you think? Let's start with Shayra.
So, it's really hard because I don't know who the bad guy is in this film. Is it the alien or is it the corporation? They would have gone on their merry way and woken up near Earth and been completely fine had the corporation not purposely sent them there to do this thing. We don't know, at least as far as Alien is concerned. I'm sure there's lots of other things we could look at to figure more stuff out, but from what we know from Alien, there's nothing really telling us that the alien is bad. Just that the alien is got the nature to do this stuff. It would be like sending your own child to a place where it's super dangerous and like, oh, let's see what happens if they die. Like it seemed more like daddy was being an asshole and using mom to take them to that location. So I feel like the bad guy is the corporation, and the bad guy is the corporation also in that they have a combined force. It's a monopoly, obviously. If you look at the name of the corporation, it's obviously like an American name and an Asian name mixed together. So it's showing that they've basically taken a monopoly over Earth and are controlling everything, and just see a lot of people as little experiments that they could toy around with and test things out on. So I don't know. I feel like it's anti-authority, but in the same token, you have Ripley here. The reason why she survived, or she probably would have survived even more so, is that she was trying to follow the rules and the protocol. And I almost wonder if that was part of what they were trying to test, but then they put an AI in here to thwart it. So I mean, it's very confusing to me. I don't know. It is the space cowboy kind of a theme too. It could be a lot of things, but I feel like the corporation's the bad guys, and I feel like their motivation isn't very clear. And that's part of the thing that scares me the most about the film. Like, what are their motivations? What are they wanting? What are they planning?
So Jim, to throw it over to you, to what extent do you think that the alien is sort of an Aesop's scorpion? Again, to what extent is the alien the reactionary element in the film, and it's really the people, or perhaps the corporation, that are the bad guys, and the alien is simply doing what aliens do. The xenomorph does what the xenomorph does. It's the Aesop scorpion. You know, you put it on your back, and because you're an idiot, it stings you, and then you go, ah, I'm dying, I'm drowning. You freaking shoved a bunch of eggs down my throat. Now I'm a chest burster. And he goes, well, what did you expect me to do? I'm a freaking face hugger. I mean, that's what I do. So what do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your interpretation, Shayra's interpretation of the corporation being the villain of the film. A couple things. First, I think that there's an anti-capitalist message in this film, because the Harry Dean Stanton's character and his buddy, the African American friend, I forget his Parker. Thank you. Parker and those two characters are clearly immediately motivated by whether or not they're going to get their shares. And in fact, the only reason they agree to go down to this planet is on this exploration mission is because there's a clause in their contract that says they won't get any money if they don't. Presumably, the corporation is sending these incredibly mal-equipped people to this place to get this alien under the auspices of the quote, the crew is expendable, for some financial or profit motive. So I think the villain might be capitalism. It might be the idea of being motivated by an avarice. And what goes along with that is, so this anti-capitalist message would cast the villain as the corporation. However, structurally, within the content of the film, from the point A to point B, the primary antagonist is the xenomorph. Just on a script structural level, protagonists want to do X, Y, and Z. The thing that is preventing them from doing X, Y, and Z is the fact that they've got this killer alien aboard the ship, and they're trying to kill it or get past that as that's the primary blockade to achieving their goal. So from a script structural standpoint, it has to be the xenomorph. But from a thematic standpoint and where this film is, the ethics of this film, it's certainly the corporation and certainly the idea of capitalism. One thing I also wanted to note, while you were talking about Harry Dean Stanton's character who goes after the cat and then ends up dying for his efforts, what's interesting about the final act of the film, what would it be? It would be the 6th or 7th segment of the film. Ripley goes after the cat as well. So we're expecting her to encounter the xenomorph on her way to rescue Jones, but the xenomorph ends up going after Parker and Lambert instead, and that, I think, speaks to another theme that I was trying to articulate earlier about the inexplicability and the unpredictability of this film. You can't predict who's going to die next, because the same action that Harry Dean Stanton's character and that Ripley pursue, the same objective that both of them pursue, leads to two dramatically different results. But yeah, going back to the ethics of it and the villain, I think scripturally it has to be the xenomorph. But from a larger philosophical point of view, I think there's a definite anti-capitalist. Maybe this is more Star Trek after all, because we're all socialists.
Now, here's an interesting way to tie it together, and to tie the antagonists together thematically. And here we turn to, of course, the most important element of discussing this film, which is rape. And so, as a top-level discussion, I would like to suggest that the movie is really about rape top to bottom. And the reason why the movie succeeds so well is precisely because pretty much every design decision in the movie, every story decision, and every thematic decision in the movie ultimately comes down to emphasizing the movie's rapiness. You know, to cueing us that the movie is almost sexless, with the one exception of Ripley at the very end. The movie is almost sexless, but from a design perspective, it throws sex in your face from the first 5 minutes, you know, constantly. And so, in discussing rape from a top-down perspective, the element that the xenomorph and
before you do, Antonio, I think for some people who might not be familiar with the film, or can you trace all of the imagery that you're talking about, phallic representations, etc., just so that we can start from a begin? Like, I can imagine some people, I agree with you, of course, but I can imagine some people arguing that this isn't as rapey as you're saying. So let's try and support that thesis. Go ahead. I know you've got all this sort of laid out. So
sure, this is a good idea. Okay, so as far as the specific sequence of rapey imagery, as far as the sequence of like actual rapes, so the beginning rape in the plot is with the alien, so a stranger basically in a dark alley, you know, in this pod on an alien ship on a lonely planet, that jumps you and forces its dick down your throat. And now it's impregnating you and blah blah. You're not even aware of it, but you know this is the first sexual assault. It's sort of like a forced fellatio on Kane, and then the next thing is, and so this is particularly transgressive because they specifically choose a man to be raped for the first 2 rape scenes. And this has an extra shocking element because typically we're looking at you know, most things through the male gaze. And so while we might expect that rape is a fact of female life and that it's a trauma that women particularly suffer, most of us men who have not been sexually assaulted it doesn't tend to map on our radar, since it's such an uncommon cultural element for us to encounter in our own lives. So so the movie really wakes you up, even if you are a man, by saying, yeah, there's going to be a dick down your throat. And then that's, oh God, okay, now I'm watching. So okay, so then what happens with Kane is that he gets, you know, basically kind of raped again, or a murder rape, you know, where you know he's penetrated and it bursts out of his chest. It's this penis-like object, fleshy, bursts out of his chest and kills him. And the bursting out of the chest, it's not accidental that he bursts out of the abdomen in a way that is reminiscent of giving birth. And while, you know, birth is something that, you know, we've all undergone, and that is necessary for the preservation of the species, and a lot of romance has evolved around it in human culture, it's also something that is viewed by many women as a traumatic, violent event. And this Kane's symbolic giving birth to this alien in this violative way is a key symbol in the movie that gives voice to these and depicts these kinds of experiences that women have in a way that's relatable outside of specifically the female experience. And so then the next rapey scene is we have Ash, the android, assault Ripley, and he picks an unusual means that doesn't really make a lot of sense unless we consider that it's trying to reinforce the theme of rape over and over and over again. And so again, he takes a rolled up newspaper, which in this case is a phallic symbol, and he forces it down Ash's throat in a sort of a mimicry of what the Facehugger was trying to do. And as he's being fought off, his blood is revealed to be milky white, like semen. So he just gushes semen all over Ripley while he's trying to force a magazine down her throat in this again really violent, rapey kind of scene. He literally bleeds cum. You know, it's super gross. Lambert's character, the other female character, it's implied that she's literally raped to death. Like, you don't actually see her death happen on screen. It happens off screen, but the way that her death happens, you see the aliens, again, standing in for a phallus, for a penis, this tail, come up her leg, go up under her skirt between her legs, and then the camera cuts and we hear her screaming. And so again, it's implied that she's literally raped to death. Similarly, Parker, we don't know how the captain dies he dies off screen. We don't know how Henry Dean Stanton's character dies. He dies off screen, or dies. We later see them get nested in the director's cut. But Parker's character is killed again. He doesn't have his neck broken. He isn't slashed or ripped apart or anything like that by the alien. He's killed by the alien's second mouth popping out like again very penis-like, and then smashing him. And so again, this is all very very violent male rapey imagery. And this is contrasted also so that all establishes basically that the movie is about rape from the get-go. But in addition to that, to reinforce this theme, and this is why the movie is so brilliant, because it evokes this on every design choice it makes on every level. So on the other side of the coin, we have the womb, or the vagina, or the uterus, which is depicted as a place of safety in the movie. So as Shara pointed out, at the beginning of the movie, there's these womb-like sleep pods that open up that have been holding the people in comfortable sleep, and it's where they're safe. The danger doesn't begin until they exit the sleep pods. And in similar vein, at the end of the movie, Ripley goes into a sleep pod, and she doesn't, and that represents her return to a place of safety, to the womb, so to speak, symbolically. And similarly, you'll notice that the safe spaces in the movie become progressively smaller and more womb-like. So, the first safe space is from outside of the planet to the inside of the Nostromo, to the enclosure of the Nostromo. Then the next place that we go after that becomes unsafe is we go to the shuttle, which is a smaller, more enclosed space. Then after the shuttle becomes unsafe, Ripley retreats to the enclosure of the spacesuit. And then once the alien is finally defeated, Ripley goes into the pod, which is the ultimate womb symbol. There's also motherhood is also very positively symbolized in this movie through Ripley carrying Jonesy the cat, because she puts him in a cat carrier, and at that point Ripley is symbolically pregnant. She's literally carrying a child with her through the ship, and it's her trying to carry that child with her through the ship to the end that symbolizes her journey through motherhood and her survival of these rapey forces that are converging on her. And so that's the 5-minute breakdown on how to interpret Alien through a framework of rape. And so the way that this connects on both the higher and lower levels of the story is that ultimately the corporation, the capitalism of the movie is villainous and rapacious. It ultimately represents the characters being forced against their will to go to some place and endure a thing that they didn't want to have to endure, that is hugely traumatic for them, that they may not survive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's and in the name of greed, in the name of selfishness, in the name of this faceless kind of self-interest, this vicious, faceless self-interest. And in the same, and so that's the connection between the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and the alien. That's what makes them collectively the villain, is they're both rapey. The corporation wants to rape you economically and exploit you, and as part of your exploitation, the proximate vehicle for this is the form of the alien, who symbolizes all the consequences of that rapey stuff that the capitalists are doing already.
Yeah, the original writer, O'Bannon, he actually said that's what this film is about, is rape. He wanted it all to be about rape, and it's obviously a metaphor, but it's all rape. And when the facehugger gets on the guy, what O'Bannon said about that was he wanted men to cross their legs in the theater. He wanted men to realize what rape is and what it does. And it was even kind of homophobic the way he said it, like a man raping a man so that he can understand this, blah, blah, blah. It's the writer's, the way he described it was a little fucked up. But anyway, he really was trying to make people super duper uncomfortable and using rape as a vehicle to do it and to make men cross their legs, if you will. But what's interesting is when they tested the film out on audiences, it was the women who had the most strongest reaction in the audience to the facehugger and to the rape scene and then the child being born scene. So I guess he kind of failed. Plenty of men that are very uncomfortable with it.
Well, I mean, it's certainly not, you know, I don't watch it to relax. So it does make me uncomfortable. And to sort of build on some of the things Antonio was saying, even the ship is all phallic imagery. The planet that they land on, there's like huge dicks everywhere. So I think, yeah, I wanted to, you know, suss out all of the genital imagery throughout this film, and there sure is a lot. I mean, there's even some vaginal aspects to the way the facehugger is shaped and designed. So it's
Giger actually purposely made it look like a vulva. He used actual meat parts of animals to create that effect, and he wanted it to look like a vulva. He wanted the egg to look like a vulva. And Giger is very well known for using a lot of sexual imagery. That's one of the reasons why Ridley Scott and O'Bannon were drawn to his artwork and wanted his input into the film. He is well known for having designed a poster that was put out in a Dead Kennedys album in 1985. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but Giger's poster had a lot of dicks going into vulvas in the poster. It's a repetitive picture. It's very, very beautiful, but it's one of the biggest controversies because that was one of the first times a record company went to court, and they were going to be imprisoned for putting this imagery inside in a poster inside of a CD. I think it's Frankenchrist was the name of the CD or the album. I guess it wasn't a CD back then because it was 1985. But anyway, like Giger is known for his phallic imagery, and it's all over the place in this film because of his artwork. And if you look at the head of the alien, it's a giant dick. It's just a giant fucking dick on his head, or her head, I should say. But it's supposed to be sexual. It's supposed to have bodily fluids. It's supposed to be rapey, and it's all a giant metaphor for, you know, what is inevitable. We're all going to be destroyed. We're all going to die. And it's probably going to be corporations that lead us there. That's my interpretation.
Let's run over the phallic imagery associated with the xenomorph and the facehugger specifically. So I think it starts with the egg. So the egg, despite being traditionally associated with feminine symbology, this particular egg, it doesn't crack like we expect a regular egg to. It's leathery, and it's very elongated in its shape. And the tip opens up and weeps this sort of like pre-ejaculate all over the place, and it expels an organism that obviously like leaps out. Like, this is not the facehugger obviously doesn't just kind of crawl out and kind of shrug and take a look. Oh, hey dude, how's it going? You want me to bust through your faceplate? I mean, it obviously is shooting out the tip, so to speak. And so that's that's where we start. The next is, once the facehugger's on, its fingers are obviously, elongated and spidery and sort of penile in and of itself. The tail itself is kind of a phallic symbol. It obviously has some sort of proboscis that it puts down the victim's throat, which of course is penile. As Shayra observed, the xenomorph's head is a penis, and we see this from the moment it bursts out as a fanged penis, basically, and then it turns black and it becomes way bigger, but it's still basically a fanged penis. And it's a fanged penis that can protrude a mouth, and the mouth, instead of being something that receives objects, it has something that protrudes out. So again, reinforcing the sort of phallic imagery of it, and it penetrates you. That rather than enveloping you like a mouth normally does, this mouth punches outward. And that actually leads me to sort of an interesting question about some symbolism in this, which is the confluence in this movie between its sort of rapey symbolism and it has kind of an oral fixation. You know what I mean? Like and to some extent, maybe this is just because you can't actually make it explicitly genital in a Hollywood movie without it being more than R-rated. Maybe the oral fixation of the movie is just a proxy for genital fixation. But it is interesting to me that, you know, the facehugger shoots crap into you through your mouth. Ash puts the newspaper into Ripley's mouth. You know, the alien's most frequently used phallic substitute is its second mouth. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think that this is just to evoke
They have to do it
by other means, or is there something else at work here?
They had to do it that way. Giger had a lot of designs that the executives had to pull. And actually, by the end of the making of Alien, he had become extraordinarily depressed, had hated himself, and felt like this did not reflect his true work because there was so much censoring of his imagery. And then when Aliens came out, he was just kind of shafted altogether. And so he's definitely been not... he was not properly represented, even though it is absolutely wonderful imagery and I love all the stuff that he created. It probably would have been a little bit more racy had he been able to run with this and do what he wanted to do with it.
How much further, do you know how much further he was planning on going with this, Shayra? Because there are a lot of dicks in this movie.
The vulva egg was the big one, because it was supposed to look exactly like a vulva on top and open up, you know, and that's where the facehugger was supposed to come out. And then they made him make it split apart with 4 pieces. They said that there were about 6 or 7 different countries that would probably not allow it to be viewed if he would keep that egg in. And it was stuff like that that just made him go, why the hell am I even fucking doing this? Like, he was really upset about it. And he's been kind of shafted in a lot of ways for his work. It's very controversial, but it's absolutely beautiful. I wish the vulva egg could have survived and been put in the film. I don't even think it would be that racy today. I don't think people would even really care that much today. But his work was censored a lot in the 80s. In the 90s, there were a lot of censorship issues. And there's still issues today, but I think we're pushing past a lot of those barriers, and it'll be interesting to see what work comes out in the future. But I think he had way too much censorship going on with this film, and it's kind of sad. Yeah.
On the one hand, so the artist in me actually absolutely agrees with you. You know, I'm a big believer, obviously, in free speech and artists being able to do whatever the fuck they want to do. But I think that part of the way Alien works is that there is a modicum of subtlety. This is trying, you know, Antonio brought up Jung before, how the alien is basically a Jungian archetype, and that works. It works because it taps into a subconscious thing, not because I think that even us and audiences in 1979, if there were just even more dicks running around, I think that there would be a bit of a problem. Like, oh my God, there's a lot of dicks in this movie.
Right. There's a reason that Japanese hentai is not considered to be like, you know, very effective horror, despite the fact that it is basically Alien with more explicitness. And so I think that's really what we're trying to get at here. Is the reason it works so well is that it's relentless in its references to sexuality, but all of the references are exactly that. They're referred. They're not direct. There's no direct sexuality in the movie. It's all there by implication and by symbol and by archetype, and that's what makes it so effective.
Exactly. That's the point that I was trying to make. You need some subtlety in order for this to work in the way that it does. And the referential parts of this film are things that you sort of unpack after the film is over, after you're allowing this film to have its effect on you, and after you're thinking about it. This certainly is a stone in your shoe movie, as to quote our beloved Noah.
So to focus again on sort of the archetypical nature of the xenomorph, the archetypical nature of the antagonist. Obviously this is one of the most recognizable movie villains of all time. I would say probably easily top 5 movie villains of all time recognizability. Like you could show an alien in Japan, you could show an alien in Mexico, you could show an alien almost anywhere in the world, and people will know what it is when they look at it in almost every culture. It's an incredibly pervasive symbol that has proven really resilient and obviously come back in a million different franchised forms, which speak to the popularity of its basic symbology. So I want to kind of dig into a little bit more about what makes the alien such an archetypical monster. And one of the things I'd like to argue is that the alien succeeds in being an archetype of the things that we dread, in part because it is they again try to make it wholly other. There's an inversion of humanity that they attempt to present with the alien. And so, for example, where humans are social beings, the alien is a solitary being. Despite the fact that they're all these eggs or whatever, the alien's objective is not to go hatch all the other eggs. The alien's objective is just to kill all the rest of you. That's pretty much what it's there for. It's not a social being. It's not there to breed a bunch more of itself. It's not there to talk. It's not there to reason. It's just there to kill. So it's silent and implacable and antisocial. It's a perfectly psychopathic entity. It's silent, whereas humans are linguistic entities. It barely makes any sound at all. The sounds that it do make are basically kind of like hisses and chitters, and there's no indication it has any kind of language or any interest in anything that we would consider to be communication. Whereas humans are very visual and tactile creatures. This is not an animal that looks like you could touch it. It doesn't look like it's particularly cuddly. It doesn't look like you could shake its hand, and it doesn't have any normal physical senses. Like its skin doesn't look like skin. It looks like it's wearing its skeleton on the outside, as opposed to us, where the bones are at the core of our body. The core of our body is the outside of its body. Where we have ears, it doesn't have ears. Where we have eyes, it doesn't have eyes. Where we have a nose, it doesn't have a nose. It doesn't have any physical senses that we know. Where we have a tongue, it doesn't have a tongue. So it doesn't have any physical senses that we can relate to. It is as wholly other from us as possible. And so to that end, I actually want to ask a question of, is this an okay thing? Should we be a little bit more equivocal about the alien's status as a villain? Should we try to interpret it in a more sympathetic way? Precisely because what the alien really represents is the other, the capital O other, at the end of the day. And that's really what gives it its frightening quality. It's not merely that it's about rape and sexual assault and violence and so on. It's that the thing that's coming after you is other, is the other, and there's a bunch of elements in the film, obviously, that reinforce its otherness that I just went over. But it's also, I think, telling that the film has these sort of capitalist, imperialist elements, and also features a cast where there's only one minority character. There's no other characters who are Asian. There's no characters who are Hispanic. The one black character, it can be argued, is a fairly tokenistic black character. He's like an engineer who's kind of jive talking and saucy and keeps everybody's morale up with his cheerfulness. And, he's sort of a stereotypical black character. And so I think it's fair to ask of this movie, particularly given other Ridley Scott movies. Again, it's important to interpret this in the context of Ridley Scott's wider work. Ridley Scott's work tends to be pretty white for the most part, and pretty white bread for the most part. And so is Alien a racially problematic movie? Is it depicting the other as the enemy in too effective of a way, such that it's going to increase our likelihood of interpreting others in our lives in a similarly threatening context?
Two things. So as far as the alien is concerned, that came from Giger well before he had even read the script or known anything about the film. He'd already drawn up art that they looked at and said, we want this to be our alien, we want this to be our creature. And that artwork that he had done while doing LSD. And when O'Bannon had been talking to him about the artwork, Giger had said that the things inside of us are darker than anything out there, and that we really are battling the demons within us. So it is a representation of the monsters within us, which is pretty much what every horror movie monster is. It's something within us that is dark and scary and that we need to wrestle with. As far as the tokenism, once again, you can thank the executives for that, because there was not this tokenism or race or gender even put forth in the original script. That was put forth by the executives. They like to have certain kinds of characters put in. And the other girl, I forgot her name, she was supposed to be an Asian character, but the actress was so amazing that they put her in play there. So there was supposed to be an Asian crew member, but did not happen. But I feel like a lot of times when people are trying to write characters, they put gender and race as part of the characteristic of the character. That is a pretty common thing that people do with character writing. It's kind of lame, but it is something that's done, and we need to start writing characters maybe more so on what they do, what makes them interesting. But it's just something that's going to happen, though. You know, it's just the way a lot of people do writing. I don't know why. Is it whitewashed? I don't know. I don't know that it's whitewashed.
I think laziness is what I would attribute it to. Rather than writing a character, you write a stereotype. I think, well, given some of the things that Shayra is pointing out, it's hard to argue that this is an intentionally racist or tokenist or otherist film. But I guess the question then becomes, does this film perform a racist, otherist, tokenist, rhetorical function within its viewership? And I normally look at films, I normally try to look at films with that in mind, with that idea that, okay, so I'm going into a film, I'm going to look out for cultural stereotypes or racism, and I'm going to point out that racism or cultural stereotypes when I see it, and I'm going to flip off the movie as soon as I find racism or sexism or otherism in any form. And I didn't, there wasn't anything about this film that really got my hackles up. Although now that you pointed out, some of the Parker's dialogue does, I see where you're coming from. So for me, this film doesn't perform that rhetorical function, but I can imagine somebody inclined to believe the other as a threat, de facto threat. I can imagine somebody who believes the other as a de facto threat to be able to read this film in that way. That said, this film is more about some of the things that we were articulating earlier. The rapey aspects of this film seem to me to be doing a service by trying to make men uncomfortable. That's doing the God's work, as it were, when we talk about social issues like this. At least that's how I'm thinking of it. I mean, maybe I'm not answering your question in the way that you wanted it answered, Antonio.
Well, I think actually Shayra may have hit on a really interesting way of interpreting it, and that is that that the alien, rather than being interpreted as an externalized other, precisely because it has to use us in order to make itself, you know, it is product in some sense of us, and it's a product of us in multiple senses. You know, in a narrative sense, the alien threat is a product of us because we sent people out there, we stepped foot on there, we poked our nose in the Pandora's box where it didn't belong. But it's also, you know, literally created by us. You know, it comes out of our own body. And so in that sense, rather than I can see the reading of it being sort of anti-tribalist or anti-otherist, But in that sense, I think it's more a reflection of ourselves. It's more us against the unman, you know, against the inversion of human traits and human qualities. It's not the other that is from without us. It's the other that exists at our hearts. And that's what makes it implacable, is precisely that ultimately you can't you're fighting yourself in some sense. You're fighting a human essence in order to try and defeat this creature. And that's precisely what gives it its unerring ability to win in every direct confrontation.
In that sense, this film sort of becomes a celebration of the human rather than a anti-otherist political piece. Yeah.
Yes, it becomes a sort of a personal story of triumph over the evil within, almost, you know, of humanity. And again, in this sense, maybe we can come back to the notion of the will to power. So let's go back to Scott's other work and compare some of the other protagonists, because I think that there are some favorable comparisons to be made with the Ripley character that suggest that maybe at core in this movie there's sort of a will to power, you know. So if we're taking the reading of Alien, that Alien is about sort of a will to power, you know, where Ripley survives at the end because she has, you know, adopted the appropriately Nietzschean qualities, while also not abandoning the nurturing feminine qualities that define her humanity against the rapiness of the alien. And so you know, because she, you know, she understands that, you know, you have to keep the quarantine procedure, but she also understands that the company is not, you know, looking in your best interest. At the same time as she is in the Nostromo, she's a child of Mother, so to speak, but she recognizes in the end that Mother is complicit in the abuse, and so she actually yells at the end of the movie, "You bitch!" to Mother, and goes away and destroys her, symbolically kills her mother, who allowed the evil into the fold and permitted the abuse to be perpetrated. And so there's a lot of these like overcoming, will to power, surmounting sorts of themes in here. And these are very similar, I think, to themes that you can find in other Ridley Scott movies. For example, the one that strikes me as the closest would be the character of Maximus in Gladiator, where this is somebody who is sort of very will to power. You know, after he's betrayed and cast down, and he reaches the absolute lowest station in life, and he has purpose, and it's not necessarily even to stay alive, to survive. It's to fulfill his moral will, and he is able to survive and hold himself together until he fulfills his sort of glorious destiny to shape Rome in a positive way. And you see this also in the character of Balian in Kingdom of Heaven, I would say. So there's kind of an echo in successive Ridley Scott works, of this sort of character who is sort of this loner who bucks both the collective will of his peers because he's smarter than they are, and the imposed will of the hierarchy because they don't have his best interests at heart. And he eventually manages to overcome through, you know, basically will to power, in a sort of a secular story of redemption, you know, of self-actualization. And so I think the Ripley character can be cast as this if we view the alien as the evil within. You know, Ripley eventually throws the evil within out of her and gets it far behind her and is on her way with her cat at the end of the movie. So I don't know. What do you guys think of that particular interpretation?
Yeah, I like it. I also see it a little bit in Deckard in Blade Runner. There is that sense of, you know, he's bucking. By the end of it, he sort of bucks the societal point of view about the relationship between humans, as Deckard believes himself to be, and replicants. which is a theme that gets interestingly picked up in Blade Runner 2049. It's earlier in the conversation, I was sort of noting to myself that Denis Villeneuve does a better job of writing a Ridley Scott sequel than Ridley Scott does of his own films. And I also, as you were talking, I wondered, going back to the theme of imperialism, he did a Columbus movie, 1492 Conquest of Paradise. I had to look up the year, 1992, in which Columbus is portrayed as this, you know, as he was, raper of the new land, rapist of the new land, imperialist, and so that seems to reflect some of the imperialist hypotheses that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, I mean, I never really thought about Ridley Scott as a Nietzschean director, but the more and more I think about it, even Thelma and Louise and Matchstick Men, there are some Ubermenches in his character catalog.
And I think it's telling in this context that Ridley Scott, for example, with Gladiator, Ridley Scott's a secular individual, and with Gladiator, for example, he explicitly stated his purpose was to set forth a secular heroic character, a heroic character who would exist outside the standard expectations of Christian moral ethos. And I think that, again, sort of if you project this attitude retrospectively onto his other work, I think you can see the germinations of it at various points, including, you know, in the Ripley character, you know, very obviously, where, you know, again, she faces her demons. She literally faces her demons and conquers them, and goes off into the stars to maybe die, maybe not. But the point is that she faced her demons and beat them.
There's even, going back to some of the other themes that we were talking about, with reason, how reason becomes Ripley's distinguishing characteristic and humanity's distinguishing characteristic vis-a-vis the alien. Ridley Scott also directed The Martian a few years ago, in which popularized the phrase, "I'm going to science the shit out of this," and even that, the entire action of that film, the man versus nature, of course, in that case being Mars, was all about how our reason is or Watney's reason specifically is the thing that keeps him alive. And one of the interesting changes from book to film was that they have this fantastic, the last paragraph of the book is probably my favorite paragraph in the entire novel, where they talk about how the novel says people are motivated to care about each other. We're motivated to help somebody out. The film changes that to the way you survive Mars is you just solve the next math problem. It's all reason in the film, but in the book, it's because people are compassionate. And vis-a-vis some of the conversations that we've had tonight about Alien, it seems that's a telling change in the context of Ridley Scott's other work.
Unless y'all have any more comments on what we've already addressed, I'd like to cover a few miscellaneous elements that we didn't cover specifically, that didn't seem to slot into any of the stuff we were talking earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as my viewpoint on the whole, you know, Ubermensch and all that. I actually felt like it was a very simple thing going on, and it starts in the very beginning, and there's a reason why I think they focused on it so much, where you have mom and dad essentially having a conversation. It just is a bunch of words writing on the screen, but it's aimed at each other. You know, you have mother, the ship, having a conversation with the corporation, sending out that message that this crew is expendable, and it did reflect a lot of the fable of Hansel and Gretel, where the parents are like, all right, we're gonna have to just leave them out in this forest, fuck our kids, it's each man for himself. We can't deal with these people. They're expendable, blah blah blah. But it kind of reminded me of that, and I feel like that is a huge aspect of the film, is that the two entities that are supposed to be caring about them the most are actually not going to. And I think that has a lot to do with why the rape happens from the alien. You know, these negligent parents leaving their child exposed to something very dangerous that could hurt them, and it's just something I could relate to. You know, I can relate to that aspect of the film. I don't know if other people have interpreted it that way, but that I feel like it's a little bit more close to home. And that's why they use a lot of the mom and dad kind of aspects to it.
That's actually a really good observation, Shayra, because there's a sense in which if you really interpret the whole film in light of that one framing that you just provided, there's really a sense in which the movie is actually kind of about parents who are pimping their children out, which is like really awful, horrible stuff, and is all covered via allusion in the movie. But that's really kind of the bottom line. And of course, in that light, it would be no surprise that the story is a horrific one.
And that the final, not final, but one of the penultimate resolutions of that is the destruction of the mother and the rejection of the mother, calling her a bitch and whatnot. So what about your miscellanea?
Yeah. So okay, so a couple of things that I really wanted to go over. The first thing is just a visual element in the film that I thought was a really cool thing, and that is the use of blood in the film. The visual design of the film almost completely omits the color red from every set, every uniform, every item, every prop, everything. There's almost nothing in this whole movie is red, and there's a lot of stuff that is very light colored or white. And this is, you know, a deliberate choice, obviously, in the palette to evoke the messiness and the nastiness and the shock value of the blood. And it's something that you also see used in a couple other movies. The one that comes to my mind most prominently is Jaws. Spielberg, likewise, in Jaws, made the decision to almost completely obviate the use of the color red, to deliberately step away from the color red in almost all the shots, such that when the blood came, it would be obvious that it was there, and all attention would be drawn to it because it's a color that you see so uncommonly in the rest of the film. So I just thought that was a really great little visual element that the film uses, and this kind of goes back to what Jim was saying earlier about how one of the things about this film is that it has some editing tricks that make it an obvious sign of an older film. I feel like the use of the color palette is something that you would see more commonly in older films as a way to highlight the blood, and that in the modern era, the way they'd highlight the blood would be to like throw some extra CG on it in some way, or put it in a weird camera angle or what have you. And so, you know, while I think Jim intended the observation that it has a lot of like editing tricks that sort of evince its age as a film, I think Jim intended that as kind of a critique of it, as the film sort of shows its age in some ways. But honestly, I think there's a number of ways in which this movie keeps traditions that I think are better kept. And I think, for example, one of the aspects would be in the minimalism of the way that they show the villain. You would definitely see a full body shot of that alien, 360 degrees, slow motion, running all over the place if this movie were made today. And I think that substantially diminishes the menace of the villain in this particular kind of format. And the alien is used minimalistically enough in this movie that I feel like, even though when you actually get to see the alien, it's pretty dopey. Like when you see it in full motion, it's kind of rubbery and floppy, and it really is not all that menacing to the modern eye, especially now that we're used to everything being, you know, animated via CG. So it definitely looks like a dude in a rubber suit at a couple points. But it's still a terrifying entity even today. And I think that's because they show less is more. They let the imagination fill in details maximally. So while, Jim, I think you intended it as a criticism, I think there's certainly a pole of this particular of that particular critique, which you can sort of flip around and say, you know, there are a lot of movies that could learn from the minimalism imposed by the technological constraints this movie was working with.
Yeah, I mean, I did mean it as a criticism, but that's I meant it because there were moments when I could sort of see the thumb in the frame. You know, when I watch a film, I want to completely suspend all disbelief, and of course I can never do that. But there were moments when I was like, they didn't have that shot, so they did this trick and that. So I did mean it as a criticism. And but to your point, I think they did remake this film today. They called it Alien Covenant, because if you track the plot of Alien Covenant, it is essentially the plot of Alien with so the main plot is the same plot as Alien. There's a B plot, which is Ridley Scott's intro to philosophy lecture on the nature of man. And so I don't want to get off on a sort of a tangent comparing one to the other, and I don't want this to sort of be a review of Alien Covenant, but you see the way they would do Alien today is they would have, as I called it earlier, the money shot of the alien on the ship, and you'd see the full 360, and you'd see all kinds of CGI that's added to the film in order to make it more visually appealing to a modern audience. That said, everything that you're talking about, the color palette and on and on and on, I don't see those as negatives to the film. It's more sort of micro scenes within the film that I'd sort of have to, like, we'd have to watch it together and be like, see, they didn't have that shot. That's why they cut to an extreme close up and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, same type of thing, but different. So.
Yeah. Yeah. My main point there was just to emphasize how it's often the limitations of a medium that are what cause us to be innovative within that medium. And I think Alien is a wonderful example of the limitations of making a movie in 1978, 79, and being forced to work within those limitations to produce an effective piece of art.
Right.
Alien's a great example of that.
Yeah, so I agree.
In that same vein, something that I think we could probably spend a whole hour talking about if we wanted to, but we won't, is that Alien has very effective sound design. And the reason Alien has very effective sound design and soundtrack design is because you almost don't notice it's there. And that's how you know it is super, super good and super, super on point. The sound design is industrial, basically. There's low rumblings and clanks and drips. And the alien itself, again, is voiced in very much of an inversion kind of way. It makes kind of a chittering noise that is insect-like, but at the same time, its resonance has kind of been played around with to hollow it out and give it this inhuman, almost radio frequency-like sound to it, sort of like a menacing version of a humpback whale call, almost. And likewise, the soundtrack is extremely minimalistic. It's almost all synthetic, if not all synthetic, I believe. And that, again, gives you the sort of futuristic tone of it, as well as, in the 80s, as an 80s movie, basically, now being very retro to us, because, we hear these like heavy synthesizer tones when a sci-fi movie cues up, and it sounds dated to us now. But of course, at the time, this is what the future was supposed to sound like. And I think it's very ambient. It's very minimalistic. It's in the background. It doesn't hit you in the face. You're not going to be humming any bars of it when you walk out of the theater. And that's precisely why it's a really good soundtrack. So before we move on to the next thing, any comment from either of you on the sound design or the soundtrack?
It's fantastic. It's great. I don't know.
As soon as this movie ended this afternoon, I said to myself, Antonio's going to bring up the sound design. I knew it for a fact that you were going to talk about it. Yes, I agree with what you're saying. So
I actually like the older sounds, and it's one of the reasons why I liked the new Blade Runner. They used a lot of the old-timey sounds to keep it in with that world, and I like that Ridley Scott did that. You can have a modern movie now with some of the older elements and make it look really good. Honestly, I think this is one of the reasons why people like Stranger Things. It's a show that has some nostalgia to it, but you could tell that they're using technology from today to make it look awesome too. And I think there's something to say about leaving a little bit of that sci-fi nostalgia in there. It was not that long ago, but I think it holds up just in the fact that Scott has continued in his work to show the old timey stuff being in the future still. So
we're showing our age, Shayla. It was 38, 39 years ago.
The year I was born, the personal computer was Person of the Year for Time magazine, and it's grade computer. So,
I mean, actually in your 30s.
Yes. So right. I'm actually in my 30s. It says that on my shirt.
Right.
I wanted to talk about you guys were talking about the minimalistic parts of it. I actually think it has something more so to do with going back to the original suspense horror that Hitchcock, he had like a certain process to how you're supposed to get scared. And I think this is one of the reasons why Alien is so fucking fantastic compared to a lot of the garbage that comes out today. Not saying that all of the stuff that comes out today is bad, but they've forgotten this element. And Hitchcock talked about the difference between surprise and suspense. And so he used an analogy of like you have two people sitting at a table and a bomb goes off and you're like, oh my gosh, what the hell just happened? It makes you jump, you get scared, but then you're just kind of like, well, whatever. Well, Hitchcock didn't like the surprises. He liked the suspense. So you have like 15 minutes working up to this where there's all these different shots of, the bomb is under the table and these people are going to explode and the audience is aware, but the people are not aware and you're scared and you're wondering what's going to happen and you build and build and build and build till boom. And then there's where the minimalism part comes in too. You don't show everything. You may even like go off camera a little bit. You leave a little bit to the imagination because what goes on up here is way more fucked up than what you can show on the screen at times. There's a lot of film that knew that leaving stuff to the imagination added more to it. And Alien is so good at this. I mean, today, if you were going to show the scene where, I forgot what the name of the guy was, but he was looking for the cat and he comes across the skin on the ground. Other movies today would probably show it coming out of its skin and getting all big and do a scary monster thing and then shoot to him. And then you'd like, oh, he's going to get attacked by a bigger monster. But they didn't do that. They just show that there's just a little bit of skin and he's looking around like, what the hell? Your imagination creates something way more fucked up and way more interesting to build that anticipation and that suspense. You don't need it to be these big shock moments all the time. You slowly build to this boom, and it's fantastic when the boom happens. It's like foreplay. We need foreplay in our horror again.
There's sort of an oppressive sense of potential energy, I guess is how I would describe the suspense, is this building of this oppressive sense of potential energy that sort of hangs over the scene and hangs over the scene and hangs over the scene until finally we get some kind of resolution. So this actually brings up a really interesting quality of the film that I think kind of flies under the radar for a lot of people, which is how the movie is kind of epistemologically oppressive. It encourages the viewer to ask very few questions and sort of has an ethic even of discouraging curiosity from my reading of the film. So think about what happens whenever you whenever you investigate something in this movie. So you investigate the derelict to begin with, and that's obviously a terrible idea because you're going to get facehuggers, you're going to get aliens, etc. You touch the egg, out comes the facehugger. You look at the facehugger, you try to tweak its joint, it throttles Kane harder. You try to cut it open, it bleeds acid. You follow the cat and are wondering where the cat is. Well, maybe there's going to be an alien and it's going to suck you up into the ceiling and kill you. And even, for example, the scene where Ash assaults Ripley, Ripley goes into Mother to learn something. She's curious. She's trying to acquire knowledge. and she has to pay a price to acquire that knowledge. She goes in, she gets the information she was looking for, and as soon as she gets the information she was looking for, she's violently assaulted and nearly killed. And that's kind of almost the price that this knowledge costs her. In the same way that, you know, Brett's curiosity gets him killed, and you know, so on. So there's an element in this movie where curiosity is depicted as like a bad thing. If you ask a question, if you follow up something, if you look around that corner, then something terrible is going to happen to you. And so I think that adds to the film's minimalism, because it deliberately puts the viewer in a frame of mind where trying to inquire is going to lead to the alien coming and raping you and killing you. And so you're actively encouraged to adopt a frame for the narrative sake of the movie of kind of blinders, where you're just following them around, the characters, and trying to figure out what's going to happen next, without actually asking too many questions about the wider context, because the film is subconsciously cueing you that if you ask those questions, that's when it's going to pop out and get you.
That's actually a common trope within most horror films, right? I mean, we talked about this as a slasher film in its structure and in its generic conception, but in most cases, the fact that the person goes off alone, the character goes off alone, they investigate the sound, they do anything to. Anytime they indulge their curiosity, it is usually a time when I'm screaming at the screen, "You're an idiot, stop it." And granted, I did that a lot less in this film. The characters in this film are a lot less stupid than characters in other horror films, although, you know, we've got our doozies.
The other thing, actually, before you continue, the other element that is also interesting, because see, there's a lot of films, as you said, there's a lot of horror films where you say to yourself, "Oh God, don't do that. That kind of curiosity is stupid." On the other hand, though, as you pointed out, in Alien, there's a little bit less of that. Most of the curiosity is something that under normal circumstances would be a reasonable kind of curiosity. You know, it's not a dopey curiosity. You know, if you find an alien signal, it is probably worth checking it out. You know, if the cat goes around the corner and you're looking for it, it's probably worth going around the corner to try and find it. You know, if now you're in command of the ship and Mother has some information, you're probably going to go, you know, try and get it out of Mother. So all of these things make a lot more contextual sense than they do in a lot of horror movies. And that's kind of why I view curiosity as having a more sinister bent in this movie, even than most horror. And this is particularly kind of personified in the character of Ash for me. And that is that he has this fascination with the xenomorph. He allows it through the airlock, and he doesn't at any point really express any empathy with the crew. At no point does he express that he, you know, is really sorry for the crew to die or what have you. He more just kind of like wishes them luck in facing this incredibly fascinating creature. And you know, he's accused of admiring it. And he says that he admires its purity. You know, he has a desire to behold it in its primal purity. He has sort of a fascination with it that is a type of curiosity. You know, he wants to know what this primal, pure of essence being is like in its, you know, when it's unleashed into an environment with which he's familiar. And so he kind of embodies the sinister nature of curiosity in the movie. The notion that wondering too much actually corrupts you to the point where you become sadistic and psychopathic and villainous.
I agree with a lot of what you said. But it goes to a certain point, right? There's a moment in the film, I think it's end of the first act, beginning of the second act, when Tom Skerritt says, "Enough of this curiosity, we're going to kill the motherfucker." Not in those words, but there's a turn in which the characters decide, okay, enough being curious about this, kill John Hurt, and John Hurt should never fucking die, because he's a national treasure, and rest in peace, John Hurt. But there's a dramatic turn when it comes to curiosity for every character except for Ash. I think you're right there, where he explicitly says, "I wish you luck," before they disconnect him and burn the shit out of him.
Now, in terms of Ash, he also says, and I guess I'll ask this question, and then this will be the last question. You guys say whatever else you want to say about the movie, and then we'll wrap up. So this is the last and maybe most provocative question is, Ash says when he's confronted with the fact that he kind of likes the alien, that he has a sympathy for the alien that he almost doesn't for the crew. Ash's response is, I admire its purity. And so my question would be, what do you guys think of this notion? Should we admire the xenomorph's purity? Is this a creature for which we should have purely loathing, or can we look at this creature in a sympathetic light, or even a light where we find it attractive? And I guess this digs really deep at the roots of the appeal of horror as well, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Now, see, when we cast the xenomorph as a sort of indigenous people that our imperialist tendencies have invaded its area and tried to co-opt it for our corporations, then of course I'm on the side of the xenomorph. But I think it's also important to point out the context of that scene. Ash is a non-human character admiring the simplicity and purity of a non-human entity. And in that sense, he doesn't have the intellectual, emotional, or philosophical wherewithal to make such a decision. I don't admire the alien, the xenomorph's purity, because the xenomorph's purity is anti-human, as we've been establishing over the past couple hours. It's the other, it's the opposite of us. So the idea that Ash admires it, I understand that from the point of view of that character, but I can't sympathize with that because Ash has the incapability to experience or understand that which is beautiful but flawed, sublime yet simple about what it is to be human. And as we've been establishing, this is a film that celebrates what is human and doesn't. I think it's no surprise that two of the villains or two of the antagonists in this film are non-human characters. Ash, who betrays the crew, and the xenomorph, who obviously fucking kills the crew. Looking at it through the lens of James Cameron's Aliens, where he reverses that and makes Bishop this human character, it muddies the waters a bit. But viewing Alien just as a singular work of art, I don't think we should admire its purity. I don't think we should admire its simplicity, because what is human and what is admirable about being human is our complexity, our ability to do the right thing, go after the cat when really, fuck the cat. Like, what? Just stay in the shuttle, wait for your friends to get there, and who gives a shit about Jonesy? But but Ripley goes after the cat because she's motivated by a sense of human compassion. And that's why I sort of say no to the question. But Shayra, I wonder, you always have a different take than I would expect. So I sort of wonder where you'd go on this one.
I mean, I think with the alien, it's not necessarily that she wants to kill them. I do take the director's cut version to heart. I think she's maybe an other, but she's trying to bring them over to her side to be a part of what she is. They literally start turning into them. And I think that could be a huge metaphor for when people are battling it out against each other. Probably the best way to win is to bring them over to your side. And I mean, that's pretty much any dialogue you have. You're wanting to convince and persuade that you're actually with me. You're in agreement with me. You're with me. So I don't know that it was about death, but I know that it's been kind of transformed into, I guess they were killed, but I take on the idea that it was an argument and the alien was winning.
Yeah.
So,
as I said, you have a different point of view than I do.
I think it's a lot about dialogue. I mean, honestly, it was a miscommunication happening almost all throughout the film. It's about miscommunication and the problem of dialogue, and being able to empathize or not empathize with people, to not understand where people are coming from. There's also another scene in the director's cut that they took out that has the other female crew member smack the shit out of Ripley for not letting them in originally. So she was very, very angry and upset, and that was a very pleasing moment when you think that Ripley is acting kind of icy and unempathetic. That slap makes you go, yeah, she deserved it. She deserved to get smacked for that. How dare she not care about others? But we find out later that it wasn't Ash that was being empathetic and loving. It was actually Ripley being smart, and that actually was okay. And it turns those things on its head, but it's all about miscommunications, not understanding motivations, not understanding each other. And eventually Ripley's just saying, fuck you, I am not going to your side, and shoot her right out of the freaking ship, you know? That I'm not even going to listen to your stuff. She basically blocked her on social media. She's the equivalent of blocking on social media. Like, I don't have to hear this shit anymore. See ya. But yeah, I don't know. I saw it more as an argument. Sorry.
Well, as to the question of admiring the creature's purity, I agree with Jim's take that the basic idea of the basic idea with the creature is that it's non-human, and that the antagonist throughout the film is non-human entities, you know, be it the alien, be it Ash the android, be it the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. Everything non-human in this movie is pitted against the elements that are human, and all the human elements, that despite their frailty, despite their their fragility, their irrationality or whatever, they're all ultimately good guys. We're all ultimately pulling for everybody who dies. We don't really want anybody who dies to. We're not really happy to see anybody who dies die. And we sort of empathize with their suffering. And so I think this is not something we're supposed to admire. This is something that inhuman things are supposed to admire, but not human things. And so I would tend to agree with Jim's take. The one exception would be just that I would say, in an archetypical sense, I do admire the simplicity, because the xenomorph is a manifestation of our darkness. You know, it comes from within us, and it is our inversion. It is us turned inside out into everything that we fear. And so, while that's not something that can be that's really that admits admiration, you can certainly view it and stare in wonder at the starkness of its archetypicality. And that, I think, is really the visceral reaction that most people have to the xenomorph. You know, the first time that anybody sees Alien, I think the visceral reaction everyone has to the xenomorph is to sort of stand in awe of the degree to which it perfectly exemplifies that inversion of humanity into non-humanity, into unmanity. So in that sense, I would certainly, so I would agree with Jim, but in that sense, I would certainly say I admire the while I don't admire the inhumanity of the xenomorph, I admire the xenomorph as an avatar of inhumanity. And so with that, let's get to the closing. So let's start with Shayra. What did you think about the movie? How much did it scare you? And give us a 1 to 10 rating on what you thought of the movie.
I'm gonna do a soapbox moment and then go into that. So I wanted to talk about a little bit more in detail about the whole suspense versus surprise thing. So O'Bannon, at the beginning of his script, when the original Alien script, it was posted on he put it on the DVD. You can actually read his script on 2003. And he had an opening where he wrote about the script. And I just wanted to read something that he had put down as to why he wrote this film. He said, to frighten an audience, I knew that I must frighten myself. Fake fear doesn't work. Audience sometimes cheer slasher films because they are so badly done, brutal without being terrifying. The filmmakers have failed to penetrate the audience's defenses. Their ironic cheers are not compliments. They are proof that the filmgoers have safely distanced themselves. I decided to eradicate that distance, to rip away their safety and leave them quivering and vulnerable in their theater seats. And that perfectly sums up why this film is going to be really highly rated by me. It's not about those cheap jump scares. It's not about the fake fear and leaving you feeling safe. It's supposed to make you feel really uncomfortable. It's supposed to make you leave feeling violated, feeling raped, and to make you really question the kinds of attitudes that you have in the world. You know, the kinds of things that are going on in here, the monsters and demons within you, and battle those out. Have a fight with yourself and figure out what is going to be the ultimate that's going to win. And as far as fear, this, once again, it can't be like, oh, I was so scared. You know, I'm not sitting there, you know, like this, but I'm feeling uncomfortable the whole time. I'm feeling gross and violated and vulnerable and very fragile. And like, I'm basically, what do they say about the big alien? Is it's ripped over like paper, you know? It made me feel that way. It made me feel very fragile and very uncomfortable. And so if we're gonna determine the fear factor and the scary factor on that, using that, I give it a 10. Made me feel very, very uncomfortable. The whole film makes me uncomfortable, and unnerved. As far as the film, I can't give it a full 10. There are little, you know, quirks and things, but it is definitely I think this might be one of my highest rated films to date that we've analyzed, or whatever you want to call it, talked about. I give it a 9.5. It is so superb. One of the things that really is important to me is to have an element with horror, is to have an element from, you know, the theater of cruelty. I don't know if you guys have studied up on the theater of cruelty at all. It's the idea that you put on the stage just all different kinds of violent, horrible, despicable, disgusting, horrible acts, and it's just filled with it, and it actually leaves you wanting to be a better person. It kind of cleanses your system of the evil that's within you, and it's like a colon cleanser, but like for the evil inside. And that's, I think this film perfectly goes in with the theater of cruelty, the idea that this is going to cleanse you of all your evil just by watching something really, truly horrible and disgusting. So I love it. I think it's a fantastic film. And yeah, 9.5, that's really high for me. So whoever's next.
Well, I'm also going to be pretty high on this as well. Although I think in my memory, it was like a full, probably 9.5. But watching it again earlier today, seeing, I don't know, there were a few moments where I could sort of see the thumb in the frame, and that was, it's fine. I mean, that's you know, this film is good enough so that I ignore those things. Like the fact that we're able to have a substantive 2 hour and 13-minute conversation on this film and the themes that this film evokes, the fact that it is a hugely imitated film. There are no horror films that I can think of that are not at least somewhat influenced by Alien. Makes this a profoundly important and interesting film. We've talked about, you know, themes of sexual assault, Nietzschean themes, and I suspect that we can go even further if we had all night, but sadly we have lives to live. So for me, it left me unsettled. As I've said before, I don't really get scared by films. So I'm going to go on a 7 on the fear factor and an 8 overall. I really enjoyed this film. I like it. It's a 4-star film for me, and one of the masterpieces of the horror genre. So I highly, Antonio, I'm throwing it over to you.
Yeah, I certainly agree that this is one of the masterworks of horror cinema and of sci-fi. And speaking as a gamer, I can say that this film has influenced virtually every portrayal of space military life and of aliens, particularly of the more insectoid type that you can see in pretty much any video game media depiction. From the Zerg to the Tyranids in Warhammer 40K to, I mean, you can just go straight on down the list. There's all kinds of stuff that throws back to the xenomorph and throws back to Alien, both thematically and in a really direct, like, visual ripoff kind of way. This film was visually incredibly influential. And thematically incredibly influential as well. You see a huge uptick in stories, in sci-fi stories, like in games as well, about, you know, infestations and, you know, entities that have adaptability and mutate in and have this sort of chitinous skeletal look to them. It's just a tremendously influential movie, top to bottom. And it's it's because it's deserved. You know, the technical excellence of the film speaks for itself. It holds up very well, almost 40 years later. And really, it's almost a perfect horror movie. There's very few ways in which it could be improved. As Jim said, there's a couple tiny ways, like, for example, some of the ways in which the crew is particularly dumb, you know, and the couple elements where you can sort of see the thumb on the scale to, you know, frame things a little bit differently where they didn't have the shot and so on. Those certainly exist, and they drag the movie down, I guess, a tiny bit, but they really don't detract from the overall enjoyability of the movie. And I have very little doubt that this is going to continue to be a movie that is taught in film school and outside of film school for generations to come. There's this movie will continue to influence audiences for decades past us. And so for that, and just the fact that it's a fucking great movie, it's very intense, it's very unsettling. The imagery is iconic and stays with you forever. You'll never forget what the alien looks like, you know. I give that a 9.5 out of 10. So that's also going to be one of my highest rated movies as well. Anything else that y'all want to add before we wrap up here about Alien, about you know, the sequels, Ridley Scott, The Nature of Fear, any of that good stuff?
No, I mean, I just wish the sequels didn't happen, or it happens better. But so be it. You know, one of the things that hopefully will happen in time is that the sequels will sort of sink to the bottom, and future generations will just remember Ridley Scott's original. But yeah, I'm sad to be the lowest of the three of us now. I thought that Antonio, usually you go a little bit lower than I do, but unfortunately not this case. So yeah, throw it back over to you.
This one's really almost at the top of my list. You know, there's almost no if I could take one horror movie to a desert island and watch it, and I knew there were going to be other people there, and I wanted them to be able to enjoy a horror movie too, would probably be Alien. It's pretty much the total package. It contains a little bit for almost everybody. It contains some action. It contains a couple little sexy moments. It's got all kinds of visual stuff to feast on. It's got all kinds of philosophical themes to feast on. It's a great onion of a movie that you can peel away almost endlessly. So with that, thanks for watching, everybody. It's been great hanging with you all and ripping this particular little movie apart. One might say probing out until we manage to get out of its chest cavity. Maybe we've managed that, maybe not. So we'll see you all next week. Since I'm just the guest host, I have absolutely no idea what we have scheduled.
It's audition for we've got audition next week. Same time, same channel.
Same xenomorph time, same xenomorph place. Have a good night, y'all. Ciao, ciao.